Okay, this video is going to go over just a couple of things that you could do with curtain walls and like how they function and the different types of curtain walls. So I'm going to just start off making like a basic wall here. So I'm going to go into my wall tool or keyboard shortcut WA. Always make sure that you are checking your wall type for what you're doing. So I'm just going to use this generic 8-inch wall and always our base constraint and our top constraint. So like I want this wall to go up to my level 2. In the case of this demo, that'll be my roof. And so here is just kind of a basic wall, nothing special. We've all seen it before. I'll hit escape a couple of times. I'm going to start the wall tool again, but this over here, I'll do like a curtain wall. So I'm going to do WA, and I'm going to change my wall type. If we scroll down, we've got 3 different types of curtain walls. We have just a plain classic curtain wall that has really nothing built into it. We have an exterior glazing wall that can be defined with like how our grid system on that wall is laid out. And then we have a storefront wall, which is kind of like an exterior glazing wall in which we'll have that built out grid. However, it's also going to come with mullions or the little separators in between them. The one that I really prefer is just this basic curtain wall one over these other two. So I'm just going to use an exterior glazing option, and I'm going to put it over here, and I'll just make it, 22 foot long, sure. And what we can see if we zoom in is that it does have these little separate pieces here. And if I go look at it 3-dimensionally, we can really see where some of those different pieces are or are sticking out in it. This can be helpful in just kind of establishing a grid for us. The problem that I have with these exterior glazing walls that I dislike is the fact that all of these grids are locked or they're pinned. And so if I wanted to change this to 5 foot, I can't just click on this witness and change it to 5. I'd have to unpin it, and then I can move this manually over. And if I wanted to move this one, I'd have to unpin it. So I kind of just don't like the fact that they're all pinned in place by default. Additionally, if I just go back into level 1 and I make another wall, so I'm going to do WA. I'm just going to do the same curtain wall here. Go back into my 3D view. If I wanted to just adjust how this grid works or how this spacing works, I totally can, because I can go into edit type, and this is where we can see how that grid kind of gets sorted out within it. So right now it has a fixed distance vertically of 6 feet. So every 6 feet, it will put a vertical separation. And it has a horizontal one of 12 feet, but because our walls are only 10 feet tall, you just can't see it. If I was to change this to say 5 feet and hit apply, we can now see that it put a little horizontal spacer. One thing you hopefully notice is that it put one here and here, and that's because these are the exact same window type. So if I wanted this one to operate individually from this one, I'd have to duplicate it and give it a different name. I'll just leave it named as glazing 2. And then I can change, say, my vertical spacing to 3 foot and my horizontal to 7 foot. And when I hit apply, that this wall changed and this one did it, because this is a different type than this one. So they're the same family, but different type. Our other option for like a curtain wall would be, and if I go into WA again for wall, and I change my wall type, would be this storefront option. So again, I always want to check my base constraint and my top constraint. So a storefront curtain wall, we can see just looking at it in plan view, has a big difference because this has already put those mullions or those separators in. And so with this wall type, we already kind of have all of that framework and everything built out. Everything is still pinned in place, so if we wanted to move stuff around, we can have to unpin it. If we wanted to change our mullion type or our pattern, let me unpin that, and now I can come here and change it if I needed them thinner or thicker. I can even load in new details for that. But I kind of don't prefer this method as well, just because of how rigid it is as you put them in. My kind of preferred curtain wall is that plain curtain wall 1. So I'm back in level 1 floor plan. I'm going to go into the wall tool, and I'm going to just use this plain curtain wall 1 here. And I'll just put a wall all the way across. And if we go look at it 3D, it has put in just a 60-foot long pane of glass. And if I move myself over to consistent colors, we can kind of see it a little bit easier, the difference between these three. Now, I'm not going to get a 10-foot tall, 60-foot long pane of glass at my building, and I am aware of that. So what I can do with this wall is I can establish my own grid. And so with the curtain grid tool, I can place where I want a grid mark cutting it, and I can even adjust these witnesses kind of on the fly as I place them. What can also be pretty helpful for this is I can just kind of have it do something with even spacing if I wanted to. So if I wanted to make this into 10 panels, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that should be 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You'll notice that they are not even at all. But what I could do is go into like my south elevation, since that's wall was facing south. And I can use the dimension tool, which is keyboard shortcut DI, or this button here, to just make a dimension from edge to the middle. So I'm just clicking on each of these just to make a chain of dimensions. Myself over and then up, and I can click on this equal, and it's just going to equally space them. And the really nice thing is that if I decide to change this from 60 feet, I can easily, these are all going to adjust with it to just always keep an equal spacing. You can, if I hit escape a couple times too, you can add curtain segments while in elevation. So if I wanted to add in a segment here, and you can also have it where like segments are only going in between certain parts. And so when I was doing the Eames house, that was a big part of it, was always just trying to add in some of these segments. And since it's not necessarily an entirely parallel grid, like within the Eames one, this one might have been split up, and then it might have been easier to cut them this way and then cut them vertically. But like I just kind of would place ones these ways. I would make them equal. And you can even use, I can do this all except picked. So I could have it go all the way and say, but not there. And then if I just hit escape, it'll cut this part, but not like that area. So we can kind of really split it up into different things. Another thing we could do is adjust some of these panels. So say if I wanted to like make this panel here into a door, I could do that either in the 3D view or the floor plan or the elevation. I find the easiest way to do it is in the 3D view though. So if I want to make this panel into a door, the first thing I need to do is load in a curtain wall door. So make sure you're logged into your Autodesk student account up here. And if you're not, just come in here and sign in for it. Now, there is no keyboard shortcut to load from the cloud, but I personally created one for myself because it's something I use often. If you want to make your own keyboard shortcuts, you can go to the View tab, and then in User Interface, we have keyboard shortcuts here. And what I would recommend doing is if you search for Load Autodesk Family, I assigned it a keyboard shortcut, and for me, I used FF. You can really use whatever you want as it, or you don't have to do this at all. But what it essentially does is I can hit FF, and I can load up this menu since I go in here pretty often. Otherwise, in order to load in a family, you're going to go to the Insert tab, which is the same way that we put our like file in here, and you're going to use this Load Autodesk Family tool. What we're going to want is a curtain wall door. This is essentially that content library that would get loaded on desktops. They've moved it to cloud-based. You still can physically load it on a desktop though, or a computer if you want. But I'm going to go into the doors category, and I'm just going to load in this single door. Keep in mind, if you did want to load in multiple stuff at once, you can check off multiple things. So like I can load in this double door and this single one, and I'll say I'd like to load this. And now this is in my project. So if I wanted to change this panel into a door, I'm going to hover over the edge of it, and then I'm going to tap the tab key to cycle through my options until I see this panel highlighted. And then I can click on this panel, and I can change it from just being a piece of glazed material into like a double door or a single door, which is what I'm gonna want. Doesn't really look in this 3D view like too much changed, but if I go into my floor plan, we can see now that this is a door. And the same thing then would happen with that Eames house of how I wanted to change some of these panels to being actual just hard pieces was I hovered over them, I cycled through until I got just the panel, and then I could switch it over to just being solid. So now it's just a solid piece in there. And you could even, if your project has it, you can cycle through just hitting the tab key until you get it. You can even make like these panels empty, and then it's just an empty space there. The kind of last thing we would do with our curtain panels would be to add our mullions to them. So that's back in the architecture tab. And then we have mullion. There are a couple of different types of mullions that you could use here. And we can even, if you wanted to edit them, you can change their sizes, you can change their materials. Please keep in mind, if you are going to be changing the size of anything, you always want to duplicate it and then make your new version with your new size in it. But I'll just use these 2-inch, 2.5 by 5. And I usually prefer this all grid line option because what that allows me to do is just click on this and every single panel gets a mullion to it as I go through, rather than having to do each and every one individually on there. Now, another little trick that I really like with curtain walls is using them to kind of make windows, especially on styles of buildings that are a little bit more modern. The windows that are within just the window tool, I find typically don't look very good in the model. Even if I was to go into the Load Autodesk family, so if I was to go insert, I'll have to exit the window tool for a moment, load family, and I go back into the Windows options here. There are, no, okay, there they are. I was just like, where are all like the kind of semi normal windows in here? Windows. Like there are some good windows in there. There's not really a heck of a lot that's really great for me to particularly use. You'll also see here that there's a couple of skylights, or there's another option too for skylights within there. But we've got just some kind of basic ones that maybe aren't going to look how we want them to look in our model, depending on what your model is. And so what I like to do is do a curtain wall and then cut it out as geometry. So I'm going to go into my level 1 floor plan, and I'm going to put a window here that's got like a sill height of around 3 feet. So to do that, I'm going to go into the wall tool, which is WA, or architecture and then wall. And I'm going to use the plain curtain wall 1. For this one though, my base constraint, I'm going to have it start or offset it 3 feet above level 1. And then for my top constraint, I'm going to say unconnected. And then for the height, I'm just going to write how tall my window is overall. So let's say I've got a window from its sill to its header is like 5 feet for it. Then I'm just going to place that curtain wall smack dab in the middle of this wall that I already have here. I'm getting this warning here that this highlighted wall overlaps. So it's essentially telling me I have a wall sitting inside of my wall, which is fine. It's not telling me I can't do it. It's just warning me, saying that's really weird. And it's even saying use cut geometry to embed this inside the other one, which is exactly what we're going to do. And we can do that within this specific view or in the 3D view. And so if you exit the command by hitting escape a million times, you just have to click on something in the drawing to get your modified toolbar back up. And we want to use this tool for cut geometry, which does not have a keyboard shortcut. You'll see here in those little parentheses next to cut geometry, I have assigned one for myself because it's something I use often. And what we want to do with cut geometry is click on the thing we want to keep, which would be this wall, and the thing we want to cut out, which would be that window pane. And if we go look at it 3D, we now have essentially like a little picture window in here. I'm going to Control Z to undo that to show you how I could do it from a 3D view as well. So just click on kind of anything at all, so that way you could get the cut geometry tool. Click on the thing you want to keep and the thing you want to cut out of it. This can also be pretty nice because if I wanted to, add a grid to it and like slice this in half, I definitely could. And if I hit escape a couple of times, I could still use like my mullion tool to add mullions to it. And so I might get like a window that looks a little bit better in my model. And in the floor plan too, that window looks just like a window would be symbolized. So I kind of like it as a different option in comparison to some of the styled windows that are in Revit. Last thing I want to speak on about curtain walls, or I guess just kind of glazed systems, would be that there is a roof option for it. So if you wanted to put, say, a skylight in here, if I'm just going to have like a completely flat roof, so I'm going to use my roof by footprint tool to do something like a flat one. If it is going to be an entirely flat roof, we also always want to make sure that we are not defining slope. And I'm just going to do my pick wall tool with an overhang of like 1 foot, hover over one. I want this to go on the other side. That's kind of weird. I can say unjoin, unjoin. And see how these aren't meeting? I can use the trim and extend tool to make them meet, which is either going to be TR or this button here to say I'd like these two pieces to meet, these two to meet. Could have been something with how I had some of these pieces flipped for it. Then I'll hit escape a couple of times. If you forgot to uncheck define slope, you could still do that here because right now this is going to slope in a certain direction. But I'll just uncheck it. And what I also want to do is put like a rectangular opening or rectangle where I'd want that skylight to be. So essentially I'm making, in this case, an 8-foot by 16-foot hole in my roof. So if I click finish and we go look at it 3D, we can see that there's now just a big gaping hole here sitting inside my flat roof. So I'm going to go into my level 2 plan and I'm going to make a second roof. But for this one, I'm going to use this sloped glazing option. I usually will offset it up a little bit just because the typical generic roof is so much thicker. So I'm going to move it up like 7 inches. So base offset 0, space 7. And I can use the pick line tool to hover over where I put that opening and click on the lines for it and then say okay. If we look at it 3D, I now have a piece of glass sitting in there. And again, if I wanted to use the mullion tool, I can even put in some mullions around it. Did I click on that side yet? Nope, I thought I did. So that way it's got mullions there. If I wanted to split it into other segments, I could definitely do that to it as well. So just a couple of different ways that we can play around with curtain walls and adding different features and different glazes.